Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Note there about the deaths in Italy now, mirroring the rise in new cases there earlier this month. That's really the whole ballgame. Like if there's a relationship between two numbers or two things or two trends that you have to understand in order to know why all the epidemiologists and public health people are so freaked out right now, as well as the political leaders who get it. It's the difference between those two numbers. The new cases followed 3 weeks later by the intensive care demand. Mark Lipsitch explained today in a piece for Stat about what our options are as a country. Mark Lipsitch is the epidemiologist who runs the Center for Communicable Disease Dynamics at Harvard University. He said today, very simply, in a way that I think is actually memorable and therefore really useful for all of us, he said, quote, intensive care demand lags new infections by about 3 weeks. Because it takes that long for a newly infected person to get critically ill. And again, not everybody who gets infected will become critically ill, but the people who need critical care will start showing up at ICUs about 3 weeks after they became infected. So if this is the past month in Italy showing the rise of infections in Italy, we'll add in a 3-week lag time, and that's where you see the rise in hospitalizations. A slice of those same new infections from 3 weeks ago are the people who are now critically ill and needing to be treated in hospital. And that is why their hospitals are collapsing. The steep rise in infections foretells by about 3 weeks the collapse in their hospitals that is happening today. That region's governor, again, saying that we will no longer be able to treat people in hospitals. That is the terrible news from Italy. That's why you keep hearing people talk about Italy like it is the boogeyman in this story. That's why New York officials in particular are sounding the alarm about the mirror between New York cases and Italy, about how the steep rise in cases in New York now foretells a crush in hospitals here coming very, very soon, just as we have seen it play out in real time in northern Italy. There is some good news, though, from Italy as well today. And it is smaller scale good news, but I will take good news where I can get it. The town in northern Italy that recorded the first death from coronavirus is a town conveniently called Vo. That I can remember. V-O is the name of the town. It's in the Veneto region. Forgive me, I don't speak Italian. My pronunciation is terrible. But there are about 3,300 people in that town of Vo where they had the first deaths. And they did a study with a local university, and they decided that what they were going to do in that town is that they were going to test every single resident of the town. 3,300 people, they tested everybody. They got 90 positive tests, including at least a half dozen people who were completely asymptomatic and would never have been otherwise identified had they not done this experiment in which they tested everyone regardless of symptoms. But they tested everybody. Everybody who tested positive, they isolated them. Then after the period of isolation, they tested the whole town again. Anybody newly positive, again, isolated. Well, after having done that, after having done universal testing and universal isolation of all positive cases, they have now gone days with no new cases in that town. And you don't want to extrapolate globally from one experiment in one town. But as a matter of principle, mass testing does find asymptomatic people who are positive and therefore still infectious. And once you've identified positive people, isolation can work to stop people who are positive from giving it to anyone else. And if those are the principles with which you can extrapolate from that experiment, well, that at least gives you a way to plan for moving ahead. If only we could get a test for the fricking virus in this country, maybe we could even start to think about the implications of that for our big country and the thousands of cases we've got here now, as our numbers really skyrocket. New York City had 814 cases as of yesterday. As of today, the number is 1,871. That is way more than doubling in a day in New York City. New York State now has enough cases that if New York State were a country, there would only be 10 other countries on Earth with more known cases.
It is Friday, the 20th of March of 2020, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the diner of life. Well, the French 77s are all virtually mixed, shaken, and poured for your virtual imbibing pleasure. We have made it to Friday, which only means we have to gird ourselves for the weekend because we don't know what's going to happen, but we have a pretty good idea. Unemployment figures are being suppressed. Donald Trump has requested, he's ordered governors in all the 50 states to not release unemployment numbers because they're so bad, especially after everybody got laid off or being locked down. 47 million Californians are sheltering in place right now. I don't think they all are. I spoke with my sister, and she gave me a rundown, and just the family down there who the lockdown doesn't apply to. So we don't have to worry about them, all right? Yes, we do. So I believe that people are finally coming to the realization, my God, this is serious, isn't it? There are still a few, I must admit, who still believe it's all a conspiracy, a worldwide conspiracy. Pretty good conspiracy to keep every single one of these nations in line. Which reminds me, why do we have so few cases in Russia when they share borders with infected countries? Because they're not testing. And when they do, they're not going to let it out. Why do you think Trump wants the unemployment numbers suppressed? Come on. Why did we not test when we should have been testing? Do you think he and Vlad had something else in mind? No, they've been talking. And I'm sure the reason we don't have those translator notes from Helsinki is because if Richard Burr is warning wealthy donors of the GOP to, hey, don't be traveling to Europe. I got some inside info for you. We'll be talking a little bit about his little dabbling in war profiteering. Yeah, if Trump is a wartime president now because of the COVID-19 pandemic, I would say that people like Burr, Loeffler, yeah, I'm looking at you, lady, and it looks like a few others now. Inhofe, a few others, they're all starting to get exposed. They all dumped their stock just before the stock market crashed. Right after they were briefed about the dangers of the COVID-19. Of course, it was coronavirus then because they didn't know about the COVID-19 part, but that's what it is. Coronavirus disease 2019, COVID-19. They were briefed, and they dumped their stock. Not right when the market crashed. That would seem unseemly now, wouldn't it? But just, I don't know, a week, couple of weeks before. Yeah, so it doesn't look so bad. Sort of like when you deposit $9,998 into your checking account instead of $10,000, because $10,000 trips the automatic. We got to look at where you got the $10,000. They all have an excuse, but they all made money. War profiteering is not looked upon very favorably, not when the slumbering giant rouses from its slumber. And that's only part of the news. There's so much more. In fact, we do have a curated show for you today. And, of course, at the top, that was Rachel explaining how in the Italian town of Vo, very small town, about 3,500, very small, that they experimented after they had their first death. In fact, I believe it was the first death in Italy. After that occurred, they thought they'd do a little experiment. Why don't we test and isolate everybody? And you know what happened? It completely halted the spread of the deadly virus. It just did. On the rest of the menu, in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, the GOP refusal to expand Medicaid puts rural areas at risk during the pandemic. Well, we could have told them. In fact, we did. Do they listen? No. And we, meaning the Democratic Party, always has to fix what they messed up. Major League Baseball will pay minor leaguers through 8 April, and then they'll decide what their salaries will be for the rest of the year. And Senate Intel Chair Richard Burr and other GOP politicians dumped their stock on insider trade info just before the market tanked in February from COVID-19. Well, after the break, we then moved to the chef's table, where a Chinese report into the death of the young doctor who raised the initial coronavirus alarm is very underwhelming. Very. And Israelis accuse Bibi of exploiting the COVID-19 virus to keep power. Wow, that seems to be going around. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is our chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will hopefully locate that Patreon link. And if you could please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, your recurring contribution, once a month, by the way. How about the cost of an espresso-type coffee drink sent our way? If you could send those funds, we are able to stretch those dollars beyond compare, and we've been doing it for over 9 years now. We celebrated our 9th year anniversary here just several days ago, and it was only in April 9 years ago that we went 24/7, 365. We had to get our sea legs. And we did. And we have been 24/7, 365 Resistance Radio as the founders originally intended, so many eons ago. And we have been able to do it because of your generosity, and we thank you. And we actually implore you to keep it up, and we need more of you, because resistance can resist when we have the numbers. They got all the money, all right? Which means that we've had to learn how to resist on very little. And we do, and we thank you for that. Because a very little is priceless. It is a lot. Thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and we thank Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. Yeah, who am I? And I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime, and then put that out on social media, except for Facebook. I can't put it on Facebook because I have been suspended for 30 days. I've got 25 left, apparently. And that was after serving a week-long suspension when I was scurrilously reported for political speech that apparently Facebook is calling harassment. After, yeah, I know you've heard the story, but I'm going to say it again. I'm going to beat this devil. Yes, I am. After many of us had been harassed horrendously by a couple of bigot, misogynist racists, as soon as we call them bigot, misogynist racists with a few F's in it, in an uncensored private Facebook group, they went right past the moderator, reported it to Facebook, and then the suspensions began to occur. And I look back, started on February 10th. My dad's birthday. What's up with that? Well, I had never been reported before. I joined this group, an uncensored group. I thought it meant uncensored. And I have to tell you, I've been a member of this group for almost 2 years, and then a couple of guys from the Trump camp show up, start flexing whatever muscles they say they have, and then suspensions started occurring. How does that happen? Well, unbeknownst to them, or maybe they just don't know or care, we do have a social media director at Netroots Radio. We have a team. So you think you shut me up, don't you? At least in that tiny little group. Maybe. Because even in that tiny little group, there are people pushing back. And we'll see how it fares, especially for this one little punk. Yeah, I'm looking at you, and you know who I'm talking about. If you happen to be hearing this, fella. You know, I gotta say, the ones who push out the most machismo tend not to have a girlfriend, and you wonder why. Because if this guy had a girlfriend, he'd be the type to be putting her picture everywhere. Instead, he's got like inflatable dolls, memes of like porno actresses going down on something. Going down on him. It's weird. It's one of those point of view things. Okay? That's the kind of post this guy posts. Now, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but you know, I mean, I don't post like that. I post poetry, I post art, I post literature, I post politics. I don't post porn on my page. And yet, the only comments that were reported were ones between this guy and myself. He says he didn't report them, but he had a friend that did. So I want to know how someone like that, who can push out misogyny, right, I'm telling you, the way that he talks to women is to kick the libs, of course, because it's all fun and games during a pandemic. The way that he speaks is just so horrendously, you know he's trying to rile you up. So that when you do, he can have a friend say, this liberal's harassing me. And he continues on with his bigotry, his racism, and his misogyny. There is a price to be paid for that behavior. Maybe not in this realm of existence. And maybe in the greater realms of existence, none of this matters anyway. Because we're all just stardust, if we're lucky. If we're lucky. Hey! If you want to follow the show on Twitter, it's so simple. Just go to @CookbookWest. How simple is that? Well, kind of simple. But most importantly, if you want to pick up podcasts, you can do so by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found, because they're all out there, billions in the cloud. Pretty much. All right. Let's get in with this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Dan Desai Martin of the American Independent brings us this first offering. For years, Republicans in states across the South and Midwest refused to expand Medicaid, a health insurance program with Americans with lower incomes. But you can't do that because people with lower incomes need to be punished for having lower incomes. Now, as the coronavirus outbreak worsens, the decisions by GOP leaders could be even more harmful to rural communities because you always hurt the ones that love you the most. As a new coronavirus inevitably spreads across the country, many low-income families in states that did not expand Medicaid must face the threat of serious life-threatening illness of COVID-19 infection without any coverage. Block Slavich, Executive Vice President of the National Rural Hospital Association, said in an interview on Wednesday, COVID-19, a little bit of information for those of you who haven't heard, is a disease caused by the new coronavirus at the center of the current global pandemic. We just need to define our terms now, don't we? Republicans across the country largely opposed the 2010 Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare as they wanted to derisively refer to it, and instead it became, a shiny beacon of light on this from the city on the hill. How little do they know. Well, that contained the option to expand Medicaid to provide health insurance to more low-income people. As a result, Republican leaders, either governors, legislatures, or both, in 15 states refused to expand Medicaid for political rather than health policy reasons. Those states are Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Kansas, Mississippi, Missouri, Nebraska, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. Many have large segments of the population who live in rural areas because vast expanses of vacant land held all the power in America now, don't you know? Republicans remain in control of either the legislative branch, the executive branch, or both in all 15 of those states. Even before the coronavirus pandemic, the decision by Republican leaders to deny health care to low-income residents had dire consequences. More than 2 million people are uninsured in these states that could have been covered with Medicaid expansion. A 2019 report by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities found 15,600 adults died prematurely because Republican leaders decided not to expand Medicaid in their states. Jake Siner and Janie McCauley of the Associated Press bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Philadelphia Phillies minor leaguer Logan O'Hoppe got the news from his agent and relayed it immediately to teammate Vito Fresia. Fresia, a 40th round draft pick, would be getting his spring training pay after all. He thought I was kidding, O'Hoppe said. It's awesome. I'm happy for him. Major League Baseball announced that minor league players shut out of spring training camps amid the novel coronavirus outbreak will receive allowances from teams through April 8th, and a plan is underway to compensate those players during the postponed portion of the regular season. Maybe all of the regular season? Minor league players will receive allowances of $400 per week from teams in a lump sum for the next 3 weeks, a significant bump from their usual spring per diems of $100 to $200 per week. Teams hope that will allow players to cover housing, food, and other expenses through the previously scheduled end of spring training. I'm sure the league and the teams can afford it in the major league. I'm sure they can. The minor league season had been set to open April 9th, but is being delayed. Major League Baseball said it is working with teams to develop an industry-wide plan to compensate players for the missed games. Players were sent scrambling late last week when Major League Baseball suspended spring training. Most minor leaguers were told to go home, including some from Venezuela, the Dominican Republic, and other countries, despite concerns they may have trouble getting back into the U.S. Well, I don't know. Doesn't sound like a bug to me, almost like a feature. Am I looking at you, Stephen Miller? Am I? Many clubs made exceptions for foreign players and allowed them to stay in camp. Major League Baseball has recommended players from Venezuela and other high-risk areas be kept in the U.S. and instructed teams to help those players find suitable accommodations. Even for American players, the dismissals presented challenges. Most baseball players are paid only in season, and many minor leaguers, especially those who did not receive lucrative signing bonuses, were relying on spring training camps for allowances, housing, meals, and training facilities. Gee, think how hard it is for a waitress. I'm serious, or a short order cook. What about them? One minor leaguer told the AP that he was kicked out of camp with $800 in his bank account, no second job lined up, and no idea how he would make ends meet until camps reopened. And Frisha from Valley Stream, New York, signed for just $2,500 last season and was struggling to make ends meet. He thought he would be receiving $20 per week until camp restarted. Now he'll get 20 times that. He recently sent a Hope photos of the makeshift gym he built in his parents' basement to stay in shape. Minimum salaries for full-season minor league teams range from $290 per week at Class A to $502 per week at AAA over the 5-month season. In addition to the Major League Baseball guidelines, San Francisco Giants minor leaguer players who were not staying at the team hotel will receive a housing-specific allowance through the projected finish of spring training to cover their living expenses. Some players turned to online fundraisers for support after camps closed. And the lump sum allowances are for players signed to minor league player contracts, but there are exceptions for players currently receiving housing, food, or other services from teams. Those not participating or expecting to participate in spring training, and players with minor league contracts who were in major league camp on March 13th and had at least 1 day of major league service in 2019. The latter group is receiving $1,100 of a weekly allowance through April 9th from the Players Association. Of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Senate Intel Committee Chair Richard Burr sold as much as $1.7 million in stocks just before the market dropped in February amid fears about the coronavirus epidemic. Senate records show that Burr and his wife sold between roughly $600,000 and $1.7 million in more than 30 separate transactions in late January and mid-February, just before the market began to fall and as government health officials began to issue stark warnings about the effects of the virus. Several of the stocks were in companies that own hotels. Oh, tell me more. The stock sales were first reported by ProPublica and the Center for Responsive Politics. Most of them came on February 13th, just before Burr made a speech in Washington, D.C., in which he predicted severe consequences from the virus, including closed schools and cutbacks in company travel. Burr told the small North Carolina State Society audience that the virus was, quote, much more aggressive in its transmission than anything we have seen in recent history, and probably more akin to the 1918 pandemic, end quote. Burr's remarks were much more dire than remarks he made publicly, and came as Donald Trump was still downplaying the severity of the virus. There is no indication that Burr had any inside information as he sold the stocks and issued the private warnings. The Intel panel did not have any briefings on the pandemic the week when most of the stocks were sold, according to a person familiar with the matter. And yet, I should include here, the Intel committee was briefed. I don't know why the AP is saying that they were not, because they were. Just not in the week that he sold his stocks. You know, if you're going to deposit $10,000 in your account at the bank, that means that a reporting officer has to report that amount because that's what the government requires. So that's why many people deposit $9,998 because 99 would be a little bit too untoward now, wouldn't it? The North Carolina senator was not the only lawmaker to sell off stocks just before the steep decline due to the global pandemic. Georgia Senator Kelly Loeffler, a new senator who was up for re-election this year, sold hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stock in late January as senators began to get briefings on the virus. In the weeks that followed, Loeffler urged her constituents to have faith in the Trump administration's efforts to prepare the nation. Well, the Daily Beast first reported that Loeffler dropped the stock in late January. Oh, and coincidentally, she's married to Jeffrey Sprecher, the chair and CEO of Intercontinental Exchange, which just happens to own the New York Stock Exchange. Wow, such a small town now, isn't it, D.C.? Well, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we are going to go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, The Land of the Women. Portrait of a Lady on Fire took home the screenplay honors at Cannes last year, and it is a rare film. Not only is it written and directed by a woman, but nearly the entire cast is female. Although set in pre-revolutionary France, the theme here, much like in the recent redo of Little Women, deals with a woman's ability to live life on her own terms. Told in flashback, the story centers around a painter, Mary Ann, who arrives on a remote island off Brittany to do a portrait of Heloise, apparently demanded by a remote suitor. But this is no typical assignment. Mary Ann has been hired by Heloise's mother and must paint Heloise without her knowledge. We learn that previous painters had failed due to a lack of cooperation from Heloise. Before she figures out what's happening, though, the two warm to each other, and we discover that originally Heloise's older sister was supposed to marry the suitor, who was identified only as an Italian nobleman. Rather than do that, the sister had chosen to take her own life. It suggested that the family's fortunes are in decline and that the marriage is largely a business arrangement. Heloise also misses the convent from which she's been recalled, which, while not perfect, did supply her with a degree of freedom that her future life would likely lack. This situation is recapitulated in a subplot involving the family maid Sophie, who finds herself with an unwanted pregnancy. Love is found in this movie, but much like the shades of a watercolor, it doesn't necessarily last. Lead Adele Haenel, who looks like a young Kate Winslet, is amazing as Heloise, and Naomi Merlan as Marianne isn't far behind. Portrait of a Lady on Fire is an amazing period piece and will definitely warm your soul. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Annie Sneed. Plastic. It's all over the ocean. And for sea turtles, it's a killer. At least 1,000 die every year because they swallow plastic or get tangled up in it. So why do sea turtles run into plastic so often? And why the heck are they eating it? Scientists believed the turtles may think they're biting into their prey, like a jellyfish, when they come across some plastics. But now a study finds the smell of plastic may also be attractive. Researchers exposed 15 loggerhead turtles to different odors in the lab. They tested the animals' response to the smell of turtle food, distilled water, clean plastic, and also to biofoul plastic. That's plastic that has marine organisms growing all over it, which is a common occurrence in the sea and on beaches.
It gets occupied by algae and other organisms pretty quickly, and it doesn't take very long. I mean, if you leave a plastic water bottle sitting even on the sand for, a week, it's liable to get covered in these organisms. And once it's covered in biofoul, that's what makes it so appetizing to turtles.
Kayla Goforth, a PhD student in biology at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. The research team found that the loggerhead turtles had similar responses to biofoul plastic as to their normal food.
So they have to come up to breathe, and then we know that they can detect airborne odors. So when they find that there's an odor of interest in the air, they'll spend an increased amount of time at the surface with their nostrils out of the water. We found that the turtles spent more time with their nostrils out of the water when there was this biofoul plastic odor or food odor.
The study's in the journal Current Biology. The researchers don't know exactly what makes biofoul plastic smell so tasty to turtles, but they think a compound called dimethyl sulfide might be the culprit.
It's a chemical that we know that sea turtles can detect, and seabirds and some fishes are also capable of detecting it, and they all use it as a feeding cue.
So the next time you're about to buy that plastic bottle, remember, it could wind up inside a sea turtle. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Annie Sneed.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
This Civil Liberties Minute, one in a series on the coronavirus, COVID-19, focuses on the possibility of quarantines. I'm Bill Newman. We start with the proposition that voluntary self-isolation measures will be far more likely to induce cooperation than coercive or mandated measures. Note the success of voluntary self-quarantining. Mandating quarantines and imposing travel restrictions are significant incursions on liberty, and the government should avoid such intrusive measures unless they are scientifically justified and based on public health considerations alone. In considering a quarantine, it must be clear that the benefits outweigh the detriments, and the government must implement any less restrictive alternative and must avoid targeting and stigmatizing vulnerable populations. As for one particularly vulnerable population, undocumented immigrants, ICE should immediately issue public statements similar to those issued during other major disasters that access to care and resources will not expose individuals to an increased risk of immigration enforcement. And do remember this. Especially in a crisis, every person in the United States retains their due process rights. And due process in this situation means that any person subjected to a quarantine, at a minimum, must be able to challenge it, which is only right. Our fundamental freedoms have kept us safe for centuries and will continue to do so. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1854. That was the day that the founders of what became the Republican Party met in Ripon, Wisconsin. The idea was to form a new party, opposed to the Southern labor system based on slavery. That July, the Republicans held their first convention in Michigan. Their motto became free soil, free labor, free men. But as historian Eric Foner has explained, proclaiming the superiority of free labor was easy. Implementing that vision proved more troublesome. Women and free black residents living in the North often found it difficult, if not impossible, to find safe, good-paying jobs in the so-called free labor system. 2 years after the new party was founded, Republicans ran their first presidential candidate, John C. Fremont. Fremont was a military man, explorer, and mapmaker of the American West. He carried 11 northern states, but failed to win the presidency. The next election, Republicans nominated Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln won 18 northern states, and for the first time, a Republican sat in the White House. With the victory of a free labor candidate, the country stood on the brink of civil war. The question of slave labor would be settled on the battlefield. In his first address to Congress, President Lincoln declared, "Labor is prior to and independent of capital. Capital is only the fruit of labor and could have never existed if labor had not first existed. Labor is the superior of capital and deserves much the higher consideration." Given the thoughts of the first Republican president, could you imagine a leader in the Republican Party making such a statement today?
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
You know the old adage, as goes California, so goes the country? Well, get ready. California's Governor Gavin Newsom has issued a statewide order for all 40 million residents to stay at home for an as-yet undetermined length of time.
There's a mutuality and there's a recognition of our interdependence that requires of this moment that we direct a statewide order for people to stay at home. That directive goes into force and effect this evening. And we are confident that the people of the state of California will abide by it. They'll do the right thing. They'll meet this moment. They'll step up, as they have over the course of the last number of weeks, to protect themselves, to protect their families, and to protect the broader community in this great state in the world that we reside in.
Californians are to leave their homes only when necessary. Businesses providing essential services like grocery and convenience stores, delivery restaurants, gas stations, pharmacies, banks, and laundromats will remain open. Newsom said the state estimates that 56% of California's population, or 25.5 million people, will be infected this spring. The U.S. State Department is warning Americans to avoid international travel and is urging those out of the country to either return to the U.S. or shelter in place where they are. The directive came as Italy surpassed China in total deaths linked to the coronavirus, reporting more than 3,400 fatalities as of Thursday afternoon. As more data becomes available, experts are learning more about this brand new disease. According to the CDC, a combined 38% of those hospitalized due to COVID-19 are between the ages of 20 and 54. Countries around the world are pumping trillions of dollars into their economies to avoid a worldwide recession. Already, a predicted 2.25 million Americans filed initial unemployment claims this week, the highest on record. In the UK, a $400 billion deal is on the table, and the European Central Bank says it will spend more than $800 billion buying government debt and private securities to keep financial systems functioning. France has also announced a plan to waive some rent and utility bills and guarantee $324 billion worth of loans. Here at home, Mitch McConnell is scrambling to put together Phase 3 legislation to combat COVID-19. He released the basic outline of a new plan on Thursday, the centerpiece of which is a direct payment to qualified Americans of up to $1,200. Married couples would get $2,400. Taxpayers who earn more than $75,000 annually will begin to see that payment reduced by $5 for every $100 they earn over the $75,000 threshold, with those who make more than $99,000 getting nothing. Families with children would get $500 per child. The Republican plan also outlines provisions to give small businesses $300 billion in federally guaranteed loans, moves back the income tax filing deadline from April 15th to July 15th, provides numerous tax cuts for corporations, and authorizes more than $200 billion in financial support for hard-hit industries such as airlines. Democrats say the plan doesn't go far enough to help individuals, and they want to bar corporations receiving bailouts from buying back their own stock. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow are expected to meet with lawmakers from both parties on Friday to discuss a bipartisan deal. Big breaking news alert. ProPublica broke this major story on Thursday with the news that Senator Richard Burr, the powerful chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, sold off a significant percentage of his stock holdings, unloading up to $1.72 million on February 13th in 33 separate transactions. This was while he was receiving daily coronavirus briefings and right after he offered public assurances that the government was ready to battle the virus. 1 week after Burr dumped his stocks, the market began its decline and has since lost about 30% of its value. On Fox News Thursday night, Tucker Carlson called on Burr to resign. He may want to extend that call to Kelly Loeffler, the senator from Georgia, who happens to be not only the newest, but the wealthiest member of that elite group. She sold off 7 figures worth of stock holdings in the days and weeks after a private all-senators meeting on the coronavirus. Loeffler and her husband reported the first sale of their jointly owned stock on January 24th. The same day that her committee was briefed by administration officials, including Dr. Anthony Fauci. Although just about all of their transactions involved dumping stocks, they did purchase between $100,000 and $250,000 in Citrix, which offers teleworking software and has actually seen a slight bump in its stock price. And in case you're wondering how Loeffler is the wealthiest member of Congress, her husband, Jeffrey Sprecher, is the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange. Let that one sink in for a moment. At press time, we hear that at least 3 or 4 other senators have been implicated in similar stock dumping schemes based on insider information, including Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma, and yes, a Democrat, Dianne Feinstein of California. Now, the ineptitude and levels of malpractice perpetuated by the Trump administration in dealing with the coronavirus are becoming more and more apparent. The New York Times on Thursday, publishing a story headlined, "Before Virus Outbreak, a Cascade of Warnings Went Unheeded," tells of a series of exercises, including a simulation of a pandemic called Crimson Contagion that ran from last January through August. The results, contained in a draft report dated October 2019 that had not been previously reported and was marked not to be disclosed, shows just how underfunded, underprepared, and uncoordinated the federal government would be for a life or death battle with a virus for which no treatment existed. Welcome to our new reality. And let me make one more plea for the animals. Around the country, shelters are being closed. If they're still open near you, please take this opportunity to visit and adopt or foster a cat or a dog. Their lives are in your hands. And if you're going to be stuck at home anyway, this is a great time to bond with an animal. Thanks. And that's just a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com. While you're there, please click on that donate button.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Brr, chilly. Partly cloudy skies today with a high near 66. Winds light and variable. Tonight we will be having lows in the upper 30s. Mainly clear winds out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Some clouds tomorrow morning will give way to mainly sunny skies in the afternoon, where we will be getting highs bumping 70 degrees. Because it is spring, winds will be light and variable. I do not know why I'm not getting any register on the pollen count. It continues to say none, but I know anecdotally there's pollen in the air because I'm stuffed up right now. But the air quality in the region is good at 29 parts per million. And the daytime UV index is moderate and has gone down to 3. It was up to 5 just a few days ago. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.25 inches. Visibility is at 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 91%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 50 degrees and mostly cloudy with coronavirus. Paris is 60 degrees and partly cloudy with coronavirus. Rome is 66 and sunny with coronavirus. Kyiv is 53 and fair. We know they have coronavirus. They're just not telling us. Kabul is 52 with light rain and some coronavirus. Hong Kong is 67 and cloudy, and their new coronaviruses are starting to flatten out. Tokyo is 51 and clear with coronavirus. Sydney, Australia is 70 degrees and clear with coronavirus. San Francisco, California is 48 degrees, partly cloudy with a shelter in place because of lots of coronavirus. And New York is 52 degrees cloudy, and everybody's staying inside because, yes, they too have coronavirus. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Brenda Go of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. A Chinese report into the coronavirus death of a young doctor reprimanded by police for spreading rumors when he tried to raise the alarm about the disease drew quick criticism online after it merely suggested the reprimand be withdrawn. The investigative team also denounced the anti-establishment labels of hero and awakener that some had given Dr. Li Wenling, who became one of the crisis' most visible figures in the early days of the outbreak when he tried to sound the alarm in the central city of Wuhan. News of his death at age 34 in early February triggered an outpouring of outrage and sadness in China. The report, issued by China's top anti-corruption agency, the National Supervisory Commission, said a team sent to Wuhan looked into how he found out about the virus, how he had been summoned to a police station, and how he was treated when ill. Their key recommendations, according to the report, published by state broadcaster CCTV, was to say that Wuhan authorities needed to find the police who had reprimanded Li and hold them responsible for not following correct procedures. It said the reprimand by police should be withdrawn. Well, online, a lot of people said, is that all there is? And another said it's like they might as well have not said anything. Many social media posts criticizing the government report were still available on Weibo hours after they were published, in contrast to how in early February numerous discussions of his death were censored, especially ones blaming the government. Li's treatment by police prompted public calls for the Wuhan government to apologize, especially as the city's authorities were accused of covering up the outbreak in its early days. Since then, the virus has spread globally to 172 nations, infecting nearly 300,000, killing almost 10,000, and crippling the global economy.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Joseph Fetterman of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Israel appeared to be barreling toward a constitutional crisis as opponents took to the streets and turned to the Supreme Court to fight a series of unprecedented steps taken by Bibi Netanyahu while confronting the coronavirus pandemic. In recent days, Netanyahu and his surrogates have shut down the court system, approved the use of sophisticated phone surveillance technology on the general public, and temporarily suspended the activities of parliament. While Netanyahu has defended the moves as extraordinary steps in extraordinary times, his opponents accuse him of undermining Israel's democratic foundations in a desperate bid to cement his grip on power and derail a looming criminal trial after coming up short in parliamentary elections this month. Just a small amuse-bouche for you to mull over about what is in store for us come November. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. But you do know that Netroots Radio will broadcast on, and we will meet up on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day, all night, and all weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appétit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme aux langues de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.